All right, we're at 3:03, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll keep an eye on the people still coming in and admit them, and feel free to talk a little bit more in the chat if you'd like while we do introductions. And I'll go ahead and mute everyone if you aren't already. So let's get started. So hello, and welcome to EcoQuestions. My name is Jenny, and I'm the coordinator for the Metro Phoenix EcoFlora project. Thank you so much for joining us. This session is being recorded, and we ask that everyone remain muted until we get to the question and answer session. Feel free to type questions into the chat at any point. Everyone who's registered for this session will receive the recording in their email, and it'll also be posted on our YouTube channel. For those of you who are not familiar with the Metro Phoenix EcoFlora, we're a community science project that's documenting urban biodiversity and encouraging the naturalist community through technology, events, resources, and more. This project is open to anyone in the Metro Phoenix area, and we will provide more information and links to the project at the end of the presentation tonight. Each month, we also have a new EcoQuest, which is like a hide and go seek game for different species. And this month, we're focused on oleanders and how they might be occupying habitat area that could otherwise be used to better benefit pollinators, wildlife, and people. So we've already added about 200 observations so far this month, bringing the total number up to about 700 for the area. So all the red dots you see on this map in the center are the observations that we've made so far. For this session, in coordination with our EcoQuest, we have Carianne Campbell, founder of Strategic Habitat Enhancements, LLC. After receiving a degree in botany, Carianne moved to Tucson in 1998, and since then has become a well-known advocate for native plant conservation, restoration, and has conducted projects large and small throughout the Southwest region. She's worked in the government, business, and nonprofit sectors for over 20 years, teaches an Advanced SmartScape course through the Pima County Cooperative Extension, and has helped dozens of clients in their journey to transform their yards and gardens into oases of diversity for plants, wildlife, and pollinators. Carianne, we are so excited to have you here. I'll stop sharing my screen. I know a lot of folks have been looking forward to this talk, so without further ado, I will turn it over to you.
Oh, I'm so excited too. I have been wanting to give a talk like this for a long time. And so when Jenny approached me and asked me if I would be interested in talking about what we can plant instead of oleander, I said, absolutely. So thank you so much for inviting me to play along. Oops, let me change the view here so that you're not seeing all the preview. One second. Oops. I
think you should be able to hit present in the top right. Or are you in PowerPoint?
I'm in PowerPoint, and there is a bar above, right in front of what I need to hit.
Gotcha. So your slideshow start show?
Yeah. Darn it. Okay, well, I'm just going to start, and hopefully that bar will go away, and I'll switch it when I can. We're going to be talking about native alternatives to oleander for the low desert today, particularly thinking about good choices that are available or maybe available with some looking in the Phoenix and Tucson areas. I'm Carianne Campbell. Thank you for the nice introduction. I've been a botany nerd and advocate for native plants for about as long as I can remember, and I've been working for the past couple of decades on projects of all shapes and sizes and with different objectives and goals, both in wildlands and natural areas, as well as urban ecosystems as well. I have a company called Strategic Habitat Enhancements, where I get to continue to be obsessed with plant lists, plant choices, and matching the best plant to the best outcome to solve whatever problems we have. My philosophy is pretty simple. I really believe that if we can use plants that naturally grow here, wherever here is for you, and we use as many species as possible without pesticides, and we have fun, that we can do really good things with our gardening spaces and landscapes that are not only pleasing to us, but fulfill other objectives as well and create a better world. Today we're going to talk about how to define native plants and sort of demystify some of the language around that, including ornamentals and invasives and how all of those terms can play off of each other. And then we're going to dive into the fun stuff, talking about specific plants that you might consider instead of oleander, or once you rip out a bunch of oleander, what to do next. So, of course, all plants are native to Earth. And if we're talking about native plants, we need to get a little more specific. We need to talk about what is the specific geography that we're referring to. So we could be talking about plants that are native to North America, or the southwestern states, or Arizona, or Maricopa County. We could also be talking about plants that are native to particular ecoregions. They could be native to the Chihuahuan Desert, or the Sonoran Desert, or the Rocky Mountains, or the Gulf Coast. And then we can further parse things down by elevation. Maybe we're only interested in plants that are native to the Sonoran Desert, but within a particular elevation range. But the main point is that once you define your terms, you're talking about plants that grow naturally in that area. They weren't imported. So this is, a little bit of nuance here, not just plants that can grow here or that do grow here, the ones that grow here without any of our help moving things around. So sometimes it's good to back up and think about why native plants are really great choices for our landscapes and gardens. And I have loads of reasons why, but first and foremost, for me, they're beautiful and they convey the sense of place. We live in a very special place. We have unique plants here that grow nowhere else in the world, and lots of them. And that brings me to the second point, which is that we have an incredible diversity in the native flora that's available to us. Almost any need you have in a landscape or a garden, I can come up with a native plant that can fill that need. The trick is it has to also be available. So sometimes that's a conversation to have. A lot of our natives, particularly the upland and desert species, are good at conserving water. They evolved here in our hot, arid desert. Of course, we have riparian areas too, so a little bit of common sense there. Those cottonwood trees are not water conserving species, even though they are native. Native species tend to have lots of benefits for wildlife, including pollinators. They have evolved together and sometimes have very close relationships, which you cannot replicate with plants that were brought here from somewhere else. And importantly, our native plants are not going to cause ecological damage. Still trying to fix the view there, but it's not working for me. So I love Doug Tallamy. If you haven't seen him speak or read any of his books, I'm going to encourage you to do that, because it really speaks to a lot of the topics that are near and dear to me, and a lot of the things that we'll be talking about today. But I am a firm believer that our plant choices really do matter. And one of my favorite quotes from one of his books, I don't even remember which one it is, because life is fueled by energy captured from the sun by plants, it will be the plants that we use in our gardens that determine what nature will be like 10, 20, and 50 years from now. And yeah, I think that, we need to be thinking about not just the plants that will do well here now, but the plants that will continue to do well into the future and provide resources for wildlife. So into some of our terminology here. So ornamental species are species that we use in our gardens, in our landscapes, that we have brought here from other places because they're beautiful. They do something for us. They look great. Maybe they bloom a lot. Whatever. They have features that provide functions in our gardens that have made them worth bringing to our area and trying out. And many of our most our most familiar ornamentals. Of course, native plants can be ornamental as well. I'm talking here about non-native ornamentals, plants that we've brought here from other places. And some of them are so ubiquitous that particularly if you're just coming to the area from somewhere else, you see them so often, you might just assume that they are native to the area. I think some good examples are golden barrels and aloes, and of course, oleander. It's so common. And some of these are also common in areas where you wouldn't expect non-natives to be able to persist. And part of that is because those plants that do well here from other places are from other places that have a lot in common with our place in terms of the climate and the types of conditions that those plants have evolved with, set them up to do nicely here as well. So whether that is in the hot desert regions of the world, like the Sahara and Australia, some cold desert plants can also do well here, which is kind of interesting. But you know, our non-native ornamentals tend to come from these areas of the world because they're set up for success here. And ornamental invasives are ornamentals that jump the fence, so to speak. They're not staying in your garden. They are wandering around in our natural areas, and sometimes that is more deleterious than others. Some examples that come straight to mind for me are fountain grass and vinca and African sumac. And oleander actually does fit this definition as well. I have found oleander in natural areas, particularly in canyons where it was potentially planted nearby and it's been able to spread. So what's the big deal? Well, the big deal, it depends on the species and exactly what it's doing once it jumps the fence, but there can be some very serious ecological and economic impacts. Certainly with that fountain grass that I showed you, it's a mover of fire and a mover of fire into the low desert, which is not a desert or not a fire adapted ecosystem. I've spent many hours and many hundreds of thousands of dollars of grant funding to remove non-native ornamental invasives from natural areas. So here's a picture of students on spring break helping to get fountain grass out of Bear Canyon, which if you're familiar with Tucson is one canyon over from Sabino Canyon, one of our absolute natural treasures. And down on the bottom there is a photo of vinca, which is a really popular plant to use in our gardens. But when it gets into riparian areas, it really takes over. It can suffocate everything else in the understory. So imagine the consequences that could have for local wildlife. So back to Doug Tallamy, because he's just always saying things that are so right on. Why reinvent the wheel? The widespread preference for non-native plants in the horticultural industry has globally transformed millions of acres from potential habitat into food deserts for native insects, with the unintentional consequence of reducing abundance and distribution of birds as well. And that's something that I think is particularly cogent to our conversation today about oleander, because we have a lot of oleander planted all over our urban spaces. And when you really stop to look, it's not doing much in terms of insect activity. It does provide some structural habitat and cover for species. And, sometimes, I've seen hummingbirds nest in it, but it's not really providing food. And in fact, it's toxic. So this notion of, not being able to support insects or provide other food, but right here I'm focusing on the fact that it doesn't support any of our native insects, and there's so much of it. This really gets to that food desert idea. These are some examples from the low desert. This is Lucy's warbler. It's a little hard to tell, but it is gathering a caterpillar to feed to its nestlings. and this was in a Tucson yard. And then this other photo here, this is a yellow paper wasp. And this is interesting. You can kind of see remnants of a caterpillar there. That was a Monarch Caterpillar. I was so excited. This was just, I don't know, last month. I was so excited to finally have a caterpillar, a Monarch Caterpillar. I ran to get my camera or my phone to come back and take a photo of that caterpillar. And it was already being eaten by this wasp. I couldn't believe it. It was so cool and very special to witness that and be able to document it. And it is on iNaturalist, by the way. But it's just a really good reminder that all these things that we do in our pollinator gardens, where we're doing things for butterflies, it's really providing a food source for other animals as well. So another term that I use a lot is near natives. And oh, sorry, the star is on Tucson. It should be on Phoenix today. Should have moved that. I like to, look at this map of different eco regions. We have the Sonoran Desert and the Mojave Desert and the Chihuahuan Desert and other eco regions highlighted there. And so if we look at where we are in the Sonoran Desert, there are other ecoregions close by that are fairly similar and have plants that we could borrow from to even increase further our choices for using in our gardens and landscapes. I look a lot to the south, farther south into the Sonoran Desert, and sometimes I look east into the Chihuahuan Desert, sometimes over to the Mojave Desert as well. But these are plants that don't grow naturally necessarily right here, but they're not from too far away. And so a lot of the relationships between different plant groups and insect groups remain intact if you use plants from not too far away. So I've broadened my horizons a little bit. I used to be very, very purist about my native plants. All right, so let's talk about oleander, which is, of course, a favorite ornamental in the low desert, but it has never been my favorite. So I had to think real hard about why do people love this plant so much? Why is it used so ubiquitously in our landscapes? And it has a lot of redeeming qualities. It's easy to find in nurseries, and it's easy to grow, not easy to grow, easy to grow. Both for nurseries and their production, which is why there's so much of it, but also once you bring it home into your landscape, it's pretty hard to kill an oleander as long as you put it in the ground root down and you put a little bit of water on it. It's evergreen, and a lot of us maybe came from other areas and we're starved for greenery. It grows fast, is low maintenance, and has very pretty flowers, I have to admit. And it's very useful for privacy screening and all kinds of other uses in our landscape. However, like I was just talking about, it's not providing any kind of benefits for our local wildlife, or at least they're very limited. And so if we consider other choices that can perform these similar benefits in our landscapes, then we get a little farther along. So the first thing to consider when you want to plant something instead of oleander, or if you're taking oleander out, is what do you need your plants to do in that space? Are you looking to screen something visually or abate road noise, wind breaks? I think about pollinator gardening a lot, and it's very important to have wind breaks for butterflies in particular. Again, if it's really just, I want something green, I want something with flowers, well, that something could be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be oleander. Maybe you just really need to divide up space, and maybe a plant's not what you want. Maybe you need a screen like I saw here at the Desert Botanical Garden with this beautiful yellow orchid vine growing on it. Maybe it's not a shrub at all. This is a great solution, by the way, if you have a very narrow area, because one thing about oleanders is they are particularly some of the varieties, very large plants. They take up a lot of space, and if you have a small yard, maybe you don't want to give up that much real estate. But also maybe you want your plants specifically to be providing resources for birds, wildlife, and pollinators. So these are the types of things, and there's probably several other things, and we can talk about them in the question portion, that might motivate you to make a different choice of one plant over another for your particular situation. And okay, so plant people like to do corny puns, and we're hedging our bets here. So if what you like about oleander is that you can form a hedge with it, well, there's a lot of different ways you could form hedges. And a hedge doesn't have to all be one species. Think about, I really love this photo here. This is from my friend's yard. It's a hotbush, a palo verde, and a Cleveland sage all growing together, and kind of this kind of wild jumble. But think about repeating something like this down a fence line, and you get to have something that is a little more interesting to look at. I also like to think about, if you need instant gratification or you need to get things growing really quickly, you can overplant at first. I often see this in commercial landscapes and urban landscapes that the design calls for overplanting. So there's too many shrubs in a place, but it gives you that initial oomph, like, okay, there's something here. But the piece that's often missed is to go back in and thin them out so that each plant that remains has enough space to get to its full grown size, and it can then keep its natural shape, which is usually more pleasing to look at than if we have to shave it into funny shapes and sizes. The other thing to consider in a hedge, particularly if you're using several species to construct that, is you could consider when different species are blooming so that your multi-species hedge has something blooming all the time year round. It's harder to do if you only have one species you're working with. Okay, so we're going to start talking about some plants now. And I want to show you the format in which the information is going to be coming at you. Each slide will look something like this, where you have the common name up top, or a common name. Many of these plants have several, which is why I also always include the Latin name. That's the one you want to write down when you take your list of wishful plants to your nurseries. You want the Latin name so you don't end up with the wrong plant. Then I'll have some details. I'll have photos that show different aspects of the plant, and you may see some of these icons that help to remind me that, oh, this one is particularly good for bees and flies, or is a larval food source, that sort of thing. And then down here at the bottom, I have a bloom calendar. Now, some of the plants I'll be talking about don't have really very showy flowers, but they bloom nonetheless, and some of them do, though. So you can see what color the flowers are and approximately when during the year you would expect to have it in bloom. All right, so first I want to talk about the usual suspects, the ones that come up most often when somebody says, hey, what can I plant instead of oleander? And there are a couple of species that are tried and true, and they're fabulous replacements for oleander. The first one that I hear about most often is Hotbush. This is Dodonea viscosa. It's in the soapberry family, Sapindaceae. And these photos show why, well, particularly the one on the right, why it's such a great oleander replacement. It's green all year. It grows fast. It looks a bit like oleander, but it's a kind of a lighter, brighter green color generally. Except for there's a purple variety as well, which is interesting. It doesn't have showy flowers, but it does have showy fruits. That's what we're seeing here in that other photo. It has sort of yellowish, greenish fruits that sometimes are tinged with pink and can be quite pretty in a landscape. So this is one where you might want to overplant and then thin out so that your each individual plant can get bigger and attain its natural size and shape. I would like to note that I have found Hotbush to be fairly short-lived, so on the order of about 10 years in landscape settings. Maybe that's just because I'm not a great gardener, but I do like to warn people that, this is not necessarily a plant that's going to live forever and ever, but it grows so fast that it's easy to replace. It's also very easy to find this plant. You can find it in big box stores. You can find it at every nursery center. You can find it from local growers as well. The next tried and true one that comes up often is Arizona rosewood. This is actually in the rose family. It's Phacolinea californica, and it looks a lot like oleander. It has that same shape, and when it's in bloom, it has these beautiful sprays of white rose flowers that from far away, if you weren't looking too close, you might actually think it's an oleander shrub. And it has, similarly shaped leaves, although they have serrations along the edges. It is also evergreen. It does have slower growth. So this is the plant, if you want to put this in your landscape, I would recommend, maybe going with a larger size plant, maybe buying 5-gallon or 15-gallon plants, as opposed to the Hotbush that we were looking at, which grows so quickly. Buy 1 gallons and save some money. So this is when you might want to start with larger plants, and it blooms in the hot months of the year, May, June, and July. Okay, so now that we've gotten the two most common alternatives or alternatives out of the way, I want to talk about some other Phoenix area natives that I think make good replacements for oleander as well. And the first, and they have, these species will check different boxes depending on, again, what you want your plants to do in your landscape. So this is not a one size fits all, that's for sure. So wolfberry, there are several species of wolfberry. What I'm showing you here is Anderson's wolfberry, Lycium andersoni. Some of the things I really like about this shrub is that it is a very early bloomer. You can look down here at the bloom calendar, and sometimes the flowers can be white or purple, but it can bloom as early as January. So that's a really important early nectar resource for pollinators. Those flowers turn into these wonderful berries, which is then a food source for many birds and other animal and wildlife species. It has a very spiny structure. This is not one that you want to put right in a walkway because it may reach out and grab you. But that provides some really great habitat structure as well and nesting sites. Yeah, again, there are several species of wolfberries, so you might want to be sure when you're looking at this plant in the nursery to understand which species it is and what its dimensions would be at maturity. This is a nice one to kind of sneak in here and there. I'm not sure that I would want to have a hedge full of it, but having one here and there I think is really a nice addition. Okay, arrowweed. This is a really cool plant that I don't get to talk about a lot because it doesn't do well in a lot of situations, but it will do very well in Phoenix as long as it has water. This is a plant that is growing along irrigation ditches and along the lower Colorado River in the riparian area. It can take really blazing hot, full sun. It grows in terrible soil. It makes a great hedge, and it has really pretty pinkish purple flowers. It's in the sunflower family, Asteraceae, and it is an incredible nectar source for pollinators. So Shannon from Borrego Springs, this is one. If you have enough water for it, and it is a high water use plant, so it has a fountain icon to remind me to tell you that. But it really is great plant if you have the right situation from it. I know that some folks in the Phoenix area have access to flood irrigation. This would be a plant that you could do. Desert hackberry. This is Celtis pallida is how I learned it, but it has a new name, which is Celtis ehrenbergiana. And this is kind of a wider spreading shrub, but it will get quite tall. Very kind of spiny architecture. It's evergreen. This is a good full sun plant. It's a moderate water user. Definitely not on the level of the arrowweed, but it's a desert shrub, but it does tend to grow in areas where there are washes. In Tucson, it's frost deciduous. That's probably not an issue for folks in the Phoenix area. But again, this is a really important food plant for wildlife. It provides these berries that are quite delicious and also a lot of cover and protection for a wide variety of species. Its flowers are very inconspicuous, but it can bloom for many months out of the year. Not that we'd know. Another desert shrub that is a great screen is jojoba. This is Simonsia chinensis. And what I like about jojoba is it is a really great screen. There's an RV behind there, and if there was another jojoba there, you wouldn't even be able to see it. So this jojoba is actually growing in my friend's yard, and I like what she has done. She's kind of trimmed it up a little bit on the bottom to create a little shady spot that she can plant some other things in. So that's a neat thing that you can do with some of these plants as well. Jojoba has separate male and female plants. So you may have a female, and these fruits are edible. And then the male flowers look like this. Again, very inconspicuous flowers in the spring of the year. But really what you would use jojoba for would be really dense screening. It does tend to grow a little bit slow, but I find that with many things that are known to be slow growing, boy, if you put enough water on them during their active growing season, they can actually start performing for you fairly. They can grow faster than we might expect. Okay, this is one for those really extreme areas where maybe the irrigation goes out. It's in the blazing sun. This is saltbush. There are several species of saltbushes, which are atriplex. Four-wing saltbush is another one of my favorites, desert saltbush. What I'm showing you here is quail bush, atriplex lentiformis, because I love it so much for those areas where you want some coverage, but maybe you can hand water it to get it going, but you're not going to run irrigation all the way out there. This is a really good choice because once it is mature, it absolutely does not need irrigation. Full sun, low water provides great cover and protection for wildlife. It's called quail bush for a reason. The quail really do hang out in it, and it has these pretty flowers, but they're inconspicuous. They're kind of creamy colored, sort of throughout the warm months of the year. But this is a tough one that I think could be used a lot more. The one thing to consider is it will grow very tall. It will also grow very wide, and so you want to be sure to give it room to spread. It's also one that's super easy to establish with seed. So if you like growing your own plants, I encourage you to grow this one out and put it out. It's really unforgiving. I mean, forgiving, very forgiving, not unforgiving. And creosote, Laria tridentata, another great full sun, low water plant. This one will need a bit more water than the quail bush to get established, but once it's in, it's going to do great. So people may not think about creosote as an important pollinator plant, but it is. There are at least 20 species of native bees that specialize on creosote. And so, it's really important to have around. It blooms February, March, April, May. I took these photos of my yard today in Tucson. It's blooming today. So you take these bloom calendars as just mild suggestions because nature may vary. I like this photo here though, because you can see this creosote bush here, and there's a Palo Verde next to it. The fence back there is 6 feet tall. So this creosote far exceeds that. And if I had a string of them in a row, it would be a very nice screening plant as well. Great wildlife habitat, and again, if you're doing a hedge with lots of different species, sneak some creosote in there. Oh, one more thing I want to say about creosote is sometimes people have experiences where it's very difficult to get creosote going. And the secret that I have found is to plant creosote in the monsoon season right now when the relative humidity is high, you dig your hole, you fill it with water, you let it drain, fill it again, let it drain, put your plant in and continue to water it through monsoon. And I have had really good luck that way. Trying to put them in during, April and May, you're really kind of, and this is true for any plant, but particularly I've had bad luck with creosote, trying to, get it up that uphill battle, but, work with nature, and sometimes that can help with getting better results. Okay, now on the other end of the spectrum is this really leafy, obnoxiously flowered, gorgeous plant called yellow bells. This is Tacoma stans. It looks really tropical. And it's from the Chihuahuan Desert, but also grows in the mountains around Tucson and in Phoenix as well. This is a plant that can take full sun or some shade, but definitely needs to be on irrigation. It's a prolific bloomer. Hummingbirds, bees, and butterflies love it. In Tucson, it can be winter deciduous. So you want to consider that if you need a screening plant to have leaves all year round, this might not be the one for you if you're in an area that freezes. It has a long bloom period from March into October, and I've seen it beyond. And another thing, when you're choosing yellow bells, if that's a plant you want to go with, there are lots of different cultivars out there. There's even orange bells, which is related. So you'll want to look at that and see if there are different varieties that you like better than others. But if you want a strictly native variety, you want Tacoma stans, variety, Angustifolia. And that's why I have the photo of this leaf here. It's very narrow leaved and toothy. It's a little bit harder to find. Often the plants that you'll see widely available have the wider leaves, and they're really super pretty. But if you go to a nursery that specializes in native plants, you can often find the native variety, which is Angustifolia. Okay, now I'm going to take us on a ride a little farther south into Sonora, where some of my very favorite plants in the universe are from. And these, I'm going to warn you, you're not going to be able to find very easily. They are a treasure hunt. You'll probably have to come to Tucson, and you would even have to come to Tucson at the right time of year and go to the very right places to find them for sale. So some good places you might find. Actually, in Phoenix, you might be able to find them at the Desert Botanical Gardens sales. But in Tucson, the Tohono Chul sales and the Desert Museum sales, Desert Survivors Nursery and Spadefoot Nursery are going to be your best bets to find some of these weirdo plants. And I believe I'm showing two because they are the closest looking to oleander. And the first one is poison arrow plant. This is Sebastiana or Sapium biloculaire. This is a very cool plant. Now, it is poisonous, but so is oleander. It can take full sun. It can also, it grows in shady riparian areas. And so this is one for, maybe a special location in your yard. I'd want to protect it a little bit, particularly because it's not like you could just run right out and find it again. I did recently get one of these from Desert Survivors at their spring sale, and it's surprisingly easy once it goes into the ground. I think that it's a wonderful plant that can be used more. They have some really nice examples, very mature examples at the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum, and they are easily 12 or 15 feet tall. So really cool plant. And look at those leaves. It really does look so much like oleander. And then Nacapuli jasmine. Nacapuli is a canyon outside of San Carlos in Mexico. And this plant is phenomenal. It really has the most intoxicating jasmine scent. You want to grow this in a shady location. It is a plant that grows naturally in sort of deep canyons. Has these sprays of jasmine flowers, and this is a nice photo, but you can see how many more flower buds there are, and so it can just be covered in blooms. Again, a little difficult to find, but I have seen it for sale. And I was recently at a friend's garden, and she had a lovely, lovely one that was in full bloom. I didn't want to leave because I just wanted to stick my face in it. And it was about 12 feet tall, and it was, she told me she had planted it about 10 years ago, but it had gotten large fairly quickly. So if you have the right micro habitat, this is a good one for you. This is definitely not one for those full sun irrigation might go out sorts of areas. Okay, and I believe the last group of plants that I'll be talking about is a couple of edibles that are maybe not necessarily quite native, but very appropriate for our low desert areas, and potentially good substitutions for oleanders. And this one I just love, Indian fig, which is from farther south in Mexico and has kind of naturalized in a lot of areas across the world. This is Ficus Indica. It will take full sun. Sometimes it needs a little supplemental water. It grows very quickly, and you can grow it from cuttings. Now, what I love about this plant is, you know, it gets big quickly. You can eat the pads, you can eat the fruits. It's great for pollinators. And then if it starts getting too big, you just whack some pads off, and then you can share them with your friends, or you can put them in different areas of your yard. This is a photo that I took recently in my friend's yard. She had put in just this one little pad here, and within a year, this is how much it had grown. And so it's going to fill up this little corner in her yard really nicely. And she's using it exactly the way we're talking about, because she had pulled out a whole row of oleanders. And as this plant grows up, it'll help screen or provide a little bit of privacy between her and her neighbors. So here are some more photos of how ginormous these plants can get. These are from one of my favorite websites, Garden Oracle, and it has really lovely, beautiful yellow flowers. Sometimes they're orangish, and the fruits are really delicious. And then my other favorite oleander replacement that is edible is pomegranate, Punica granatum. One thing to consider is that it will lose its leaves in the winter. So don't freak out when the leaves turn yellow in the fall, totally normal. Again, if you need all year screening, you might not want to have a whole hedgerow of these. The flowers are gorgeous, these cherry red or bright red color. It's a really great hummingbird plant, actually, and having homegrown pomegranates is a wonderful thing. They're great to share with friends and really easy to grow. I'm using pomegranates in my yard. I have a huge parking lot in my front yard, and it gets really hot in the summer. And so I'm using them to grow up to provide shade for vehicles in the area. And so far it's going great. They're growing pretty quickly, and they're really attractive plants. You can also trim them up into tree form if you like that better for your situation. So I want to talk a little bit, those are all the ideas that I had for you, and I'm really excited during the question and answer portion to talk about what other ideas you have, which ones I missed, and which ones I should add into the next time I talk about this. But I want to talk a little bit about how you source your plants. And for the varieties of plants that I was talking about that are native, if you can get them grown locally from local seed source, they're going to perform even better for you. A lot of these plants will have kind of a broad distribution. And so, they might grow in Texas, but do you want a Texas plant, or do you want the same species that was actually grown in Arizona that might be a little better suited to our conditions? I think it's really important to ensure that the plant materials that you're buying are free from systemic pesticides. This is a desert milkweed here. This was on my patio a few years ago. I am positive and sure and confident that these caterpillars are not munching down on pesticide treated plants, because I know who grew them and I know how they grew them. And I think it's really important to have those conversations with your growers. And just know that if you're buying from a large retailer, they may not be able to answer your questions. So sometimes you have to dig a little bit to get the information that you need. I also really like to grow or to buy from my local growers, because it's really supporting the local economy and families right in my community. Okay, so I have I told you I was obsessed with lists, and I've been compiling these lists for different areas in Arizona. I have lists for Tucson, Oro Valley, Green Valley, Phoenix, Chihuahua Desert, Cochise County. And they are presented as bloom calendars. And if you go to my website and sign up for my email list, you get a free download. It's kind of cool. So these are top 20 lists of native pollinator plants that are specifically very tightly native to those areas and are available in the nurseries nearby. This is what the bloom calendar for Phoenix looks like. I have it organized by flower color, and then by whether it's a tree, a shrub, or a smaller perennial. And I developed these lists, they're not just my top favorite plants for a particular area. I had to balance them out so that you don't have, all wildflowers and no trees, for instance. We want to end up with some vegetation structure that's good for wildlife. I also ran these lists past my local nursery friends to make sure I wasn't putting things on there that were really hard to grow or really not available, because that's not the point. I want to set people up for success. They're skewed toward really attractive species for urban landscapes, and they also have known pollinator benefits. So again, if you're interested in getting these free lists, it's kind of a fun, good way to get started. It's not everything, but it might give you some ideas. Just go to my website, strategichabitats.com/bloom, and it'll take you right there. Again, I'm obsessed with matching plants to particular situations, and I do consultations. If you're interested in that, please get in touch. I also do lots of online classes and workshops and consultations, and if you sign up for my newsletter, I will have announcements of what's coming up. A lot of my classes are for a charge, but a lot of times I'm giving free talks, and you can get the information for free if you show up. So let's definitely keep in touch. So I've done all my self-promotion. Now we can take questions.
Thank you so much, Carianne. We're so excited. And we've got quite a few questions in the chat, so those get priority, and I'll read those off to you first.
Right. And
then we'll take some verbal questions if we have that time. The first one that we have in the chat, you already addressed rosewood being a good substitute for oleanders, but this person wants to know, is it poisonous because they have horses?
I would check into that first. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not positive. I don't think it is, but I don't want to say for sure.
Okay, thank you. Let me find the next one. So, can you grow creosote from a cutting?
I can't. I haven't heard of people doing it that way, but you can grow lots of plants from cuttings if you have enough wherewithal to do it. I do know that you can do it from seeds. That can be finicky, but there is a really great resource for. Do you send follow-up information after these? I'm going to give you the propagation database link, and that will be where you can search for different species, and all of the professional propagators who have experience with those species can submit their protocols for success, and that can get you through a lot of unnecessary trial and error. And I'm sure creosote is in there for growing by seed. And if people do it by cuttings, they would have protocols in there for that too. I've never heard of it. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen though.
I believe you can, but that's a good
Yeah,
resource. If you wouldn't mind. Yeah, we send a follow-up email with a link to the recording, so I'll be sure to include that in there.
great.
Next one we have, are Arizona rosewood flowers fragrant?
I am not sure. It's been a while since I've come across one blooming to stick my face in, so I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
No worries. The next one is, if jojoba isn't producing anything, does that mean I most likely have two males or two females, or does it just take time for them to reproduce and make seed?
It takes time. I had a jojoba in at my old house that I put in as a 1 gallon, and it took forever to start growing. And I would say it was 3 years before I could see any measurable growth on it. And then it was another couple of years before I could tell if I had a boy or a girl plant. It was a boy. So it takes a while. They put their roots down for a while before they start thinking about doing other things like flowering.
The next question is, I have two yellow bells that are about 3 feet high and wide, not on irrigation. Would they survive a transplant to a new area on irrigation?
Potentially. And I would say the right now is when I would do that. When you dig them up, try to get keep as much of the root material intact as possible. Have your other hole already dug, plop it in there, and just really be gentle. And again, this time, people don't think about monsoon as a great time for working in your gardens, because sometimes it's so humid, it's hard for us to be out there, but it's a really great time for plants. Those high humidity days help to forgive damage to roots and things like that. So go for it. And then, honestly, if it doesn't work, it might not work. It's easy to find yellow bells plants, so you could replace them, but I think it's worth a shot.
Yeah, we're not perfect. Gardeners lose things. It happens.
That's true.
The next one is, what Bermuda grass replacements do you recommend to still provide the function of having kind of a soft ground cover? And someone in the chat graciously answered, buffalo grass, not
Yeah,
full grass.
yeah,
That's Buddleia dactyloides for the.
yeah, that's a good one. That's a whole nother talk we should do. But some of the things that come straight to mind, there is a really cool plant called frog fruit, phyla. That's a native that kind of will creep along, and it will take a little bit of foot traffic. Has really cute little flowers. Other things you can use. There is another grass called, this is confusing because it's called vine mesquite, but it's a grass. It's Hopia is the name of it. And it's one that I like to use in restoration projects to compete with Bermuda grass, because the way it grows, it can be quite aggressive. But that's one that you could use as a Bermuda grass replacement. It's so hard to get rid of Bermuda grass. So I applaud everyone who's trying to do that, because it takes some real persistence and tenacity.
Yeah, I think maybe even one of the 3-ons, doesn't one of those stay kind of short? I am by no means a grass expert.
I'm not thinking of a perennial one that stays short, but that doesn't mean there might not be one.
The next question we have is, you said oleander is hard to kill when talking about planting them and reasons they're popular. Is it difficult to remove established oleander, and what's your advice for that?
Yes. Okay. So my first piece of advice is wear gloves and sleeves, because when you start cutting oleander, it has sap in it that can be very irritating to a lot of people / toxic. So you definitely don't want it on your skin. It is difficult to remove. I have 7/10 of an acre is my lot, and it was ringed in oleander, and it has taken a lot of muscle. These were very mature plants. a lot of muscle, and I ended up, hiring somebody to help, and they used equipment to pull it out. It helps to, if you want to attack it yourself, it helps to cut all of the stems off and get rid of that. So you're dealing just with the root ball. Soak it with the hose and soak it and soak it and soak it, and then start digging it out. You will need pickaxe, you will need a pry bar, you might need your pickup truck. Actually, people do that. Definitely one thing to be careful of, be sure you have your utilities located, because there's nothing like busting a water line that the oleander roots have gotten into. You don't want to do that. Yeah, and then you do want to get as much of the root as possible, even though it is a bear of a job, because it does resprout.
So fair warning, it may take a couple of tries.
It may.
We touched on this a little bit with the previous question, but native grasses to use that aren't fountain grass.
Oh, there's so many. I love bullgrass, which is Muhlenbergia emerslii. I love Arizona cotton top, although it's a little bit more diminutive. If we're thinking of like big beefy natives that like really make a splash, giant saccatone, which is Sporobolus wrightii, is a nice one. There's lots of muley grasses, and there's a lot of ones that are getting more popular with the nurseries and in the horticultural trade. They're doing, neat things to make them a little more pretty, like, pink this and pink that. Lots of pink things, but many of them are lovely, and they're really just selected. Oh my gosh, sorry, you caught me off guard. There's so many great native grasses. I think the thing to look at when you're buying them or looking at them in the nursery is just, is this one that's going to stay low, or is it going to get gigantic, and how does that match up with what your needs are?
Perfect. We're at 4 o'clock, Carianne. Are you okay with staying a little bit later and answering some
I am.
Okay. So I'll be respectful of your time. So
And I won't be offended if people start dropping out. I'm not looking. Doesn't hurt my feelings.
You don't have a list of names. What is the lifespan of Indian fig?
The lifespan of Indian fig. Longer than I have been in any one place. I'm not exactly sure how long an individual plant will live. I will say that it is so easy to keep one plant going and going and going, because, as it starts growing, you can really be like, ooh, well, I don't know, that little branch looks a little funny. I'm going to take that off, and then you have a whole new plant you can put somewhere else. Or like, what happens in Tucson sometimes is when we have really cold winters, a bunch of the pads will drop. And some of them can be salvaged into new plants, and some of them are just too far gone. But yeah, I'm not sure how long an individual plant would live. A long time.
Decades.
I would guess decades.
Next question is, are hackberry trees native?
Yes, hackberry trees. So related to the hackberry shrub I showed you, desert hackberry is canyon hackberry. It has also netleaf hackberry are the common names. It's Celtis reticulata. Amazing, wonderful, beautiful landscape trees that should be used more. They have kind of a real crazy fun form to them, so they're fun to look at. They will grow fairly quickly. It is a higher water use tree. Because it grows naturally in riparian areas. So on the order of like an ash tree or a walnut tree, not as much as a cottonwood tree, but a little more than a mesquite tree.
Someone in the chat offered advice for planting creosotes. It says, pick the fuzzy seeds, spread on ground, kick little rocks over them, do this before it rains.
I love it.
And we have some comments about oleander being poisonous, and it was once at the Tucson Zoo, and giraffes got in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, they died.
Yeah.
It's awful. Yeah.
Another reason to avoid oleanders, our neighbors on both sides planted them right against block walls. Eventually they cracked our walls apart.
Yeah.
Good question here. Do you need both male and female jojobas to get fruit?
Yes.
Mm.
Yes. Yes, and sorry, I had to argue with myself for a moment. So there was, back in the 80s, there was a big push to use the oleander, I'm sorry, not oleander, jojoba oil is a really great product. And particularly as you go out near Yuma, you can see the old jojoba fields. And one of the things that they did not calculate on was that male and female jojoba plants do not occur in equal ratio. And so instead of getting, because you can't tell what sex they are until they're mature. So they ended up with 75% male and only 1/4% female, and they weren't able to produce enough oil to make it economically viable. And so yes, you'd have to have both.
That's so interesting to know that, we actually had farms and things producing jojoba oil at one point.
Yeah.
So
It's a good food. It's a good food plant too. You can eat those seeds.
It's actually nice to snack on the trail.
Yeah.
All right, I've put Carianne's information. That's all the questions that we have. We have a couple of thank yous. I've put Carianne's Facebook and Instagram handle in the chat and her email. Also, there's the EcoFlora website, our July EcoQuest, so you can help us map some oleanders if you'd like to, if you're in the Metro Phoenix area. And also a link to sign up for our newsletter to keep up with our happenings and presentations like this one. If you aren't already, follow us on social at EcoFlora PHX. I'll type that in the chat as well. And thank you so much, Carianne. Your enthusiasm and passion are inspiring, and your knowledge is so very appreciated, as is evidenced by everyone here today. And I just wanted to say especially thank you for offering information for free. It is so, so appreciated by so many. Thank you to all of us who joined, all of you who joined us today. I hope you really enjoyed hearing from Carianne. And if you have any questions for follow-up, like I said, her email is in the chat. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Get out there and garden.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you again, Carianne.
Bye, Jenny. Thank you so much.